Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Bite Size. With us today is the one and only Phil, and he is going to talk about the request for comments process that we have introduced a while back. And it is your stage.
Thank you very much. Thanks, Van. Yeah, this is just a quick kind of informational bite size, basically, and the kind of one I expect not particularly interesting, but nice for people to be aware of, and hopefully we can point back to it in the future as a quick reference point. RFCs are something that we've brought in the last kind of few months within NF Core, and this is a quick overview of what RFCs are, why we brought them in, how they work, and how you can use them and keep track of them. So RFC stand for request for comment, as Fran said, aka proposals, and we'll come into it a little bit in a minute. So this all kind of started off basically because I messed up because it's not the first time it's happened, but and it's kind of been building up to this point. But the trigger was that I moved a bit too quickly with one of the suggested ideas for within NF Core and started doing stuff, and then some people in the core team were like, whoa, 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 hang on, what's this? Like, we haven't agreed to this, what's going on? And we kind of had this discussion a little bit about how governance works and how we make sure that everyone who needs to be involved in making decisions is involved, and starting to think about the kind of meta of how the community functions. These things have kind of been rolling along the whole time. But basically, the reason that we need this thing now is because our community, we feel, has hit a certain threshold where it's big enough to need this kind of thing. Generally, with the governance of NF Core, this has been our strategy since the start, is to get away with as little kind of bureaucracy and red tape as possible, and only bring things in bit by bit as we feel that they are actually beneficial or warranted or necessary. The same is true for kind of our teams within NF Core, like the core team, maintainers, outreach, infrastructure steering, safety. And this is another example where until now, when our community has been kind of small and lean and everyone kind of knows everyone, this kind of thing is not really necessary. It's just overhead. But now we're getting to the number of people and the number of effects that it is actually genuinely useful and worth the additional effort and formality. Basically, when I say big, what I mean is that we have lots of people in the community, which is great. I can't remember how many thousand people we have in Slack, like 14,000 people or something in Slack. Lots of people using NF Core pipelines, lots of people developing pipelines, lots of people kind of using NF Core tooling on the periphery. So lots of people in and around the community. That means lots of people are coming up with ideas of things that we can do differently to improve kind of friction points or come up with new ideas for new kind of new initiatives and new ways of doing things or new additives which go into the NF Core community. And that means that when we bring in changes to places in NF Core which affect all pipelines and all people, such as changes to a template or changes to automation, things like this, then there are also a lot of people affected by those changes. So the bigger this gets, the kind of the more inputs we have, and also the more impactful and the more the repercussions. So, what do we want? What we're thinking about with this is we want to encourage new ideas. We don't want to stifle innovation. We don't want to have people who are scared of changing things. That is how things start to stagnate and kind of go bad. We want new ideas. We want things to be fresh and new and change. We want there to be a suitable forum where new ideas can be proposed and discussed in the open. So if ever anyone asks about something like, why is it like this? We can kind of point back to where that feature was suggested and discussed and the pros and cons. And there's that kind of full traceability where we don't have to reinvent the wheel. And especially as the people within the community change over time, people in the future can go back and look at the previous justifications and see if they're still valid and kind of understand the context of a certain feature. We want it to be transparent about how decisions are made. Very often, the core team within NF Core kind of makes a final call about whether something happens or not. We discuss amongst ourselves a lot to make this happen, but much of that discussion is basically behind closed doors, which doesn't really follow the ethos of NF Core. We are very much open source to the heart. and we want to be as transparent as possible with everybody about the process and the reasoning and the thinking that goes into these things. So we wanted to kind of move where these decisions happen into a new place where they can be seen by anybody and other people can kind of chip in and contribute their feedback alongside ours. And then finally, and one of potentially the most important things is we wanted to make it possible for people to see these discussions as they're happening in the early stages, both so they can raise a hand and say, no, thank you, that's going to break my workflow, or say it's a great idea, please let's do it as fast as possible, but also just so that they know it's coming down the road, basically as a kind of form of advanced roadmap. So again, by making this whole process more transparent, it's also easier for people to track and follow these changes. So this is not new. We've been thinking about this for years, actually, about what kind of way to do it and how we can do it always with the least overhead. Because the more effort that's required with these things, the less likely it is that people will use them. And that will either slow down the community or mean that people just don't bother. So we've been looking around a lot. And as many of you know, especially Matthias and I, and the core team are both big fans of this project called Astro, which is a web framework. The NF Core website is built using Astro. It's really nice. They're also open source. They're also community driven. They have quite a lot in common with us, though nothing to do with bioinformatics. And they have a public roadmap with a process, really well-defined governance process for how people can suggest changes to that web framework and how it's tracked through. And so this was one of the places that really kind of was a light bulb moment reading this and thinking, well, we can probably use pretty much the same system that they've developed. And I think it would track quite well for NF Core. All of this is public. So if you pop over to GitHub and go to with Astro/roadmap, you'll be able to find what they do here. It's actually changed a little bit since we started doing our own RFCs. So it's slightly more variants now, but basically the concept is pretty similar, and you'll see a lot of the same terminology. Things like proposal champion is an idea that we've directly stolen from Astro. So thank you to the Astro community for coming up with this. And basically, we really like the suggestion that they have, where people come in with low friction, unstructured ideas as an initial proposal. Then it kind of becomes slowly more formal and starts being reviewed by the Astro Technical Steering Committee, which is kind of the equivalent of our core team. And then things go through to development. And then there's basically a paper trail once the new features are shipped. We really like this. And they had also quite a lot of material, such as templates for how these things happen. And you can see the whole thing playing out on their website in their GitHub repo with issues, pull requests, discussions, and so on. So we did what all great communities do. We copied and stole it from Astro and basically re-implemented. And you can go to the NF Core website now. If you go to the docs and look for project proposals, we try to avoid acronyms in NF Core. So RFCs, we thought that's kind of, you have to know what RFC means, which is why we called it project proposals. I'm not sure if it's actually any easier to find or not, but that's what it is. Project proposals or RFCs. And this documentation page basically sketches out the whole process. And you can read in detail here. I'm going to kind of go over it very quickly to make it try and describe it. Basically, the summary is the TLDR of how this works. If you have an idea and you're not really sure if it fits for an RFC or not, then we have a Slack channel called RFC Suggestions. You can jump in there and just say, what do you think about this? Is this the right kind of scope for an RFC, or is it, can I just do it? Or, what do people think? And it's just a very fluid place where people can just chat. You'll get feedback there pretty quickly, probably from the core team or others. And if you decide to go forward with an RFC, the next step is you go to our repository, which is called nfcore/proposals, and you create a new issue using the RFC template, which I'll show in a second. This then is the primary place for discussion. Everyone goes back and forth about yes, no, should it be done like this? Should it be done now? And at some point, people will start voting, and the core team will vote on whether to approve or refuse the RFC, and it will be given a status. If it's approved, that's your green light. You can go ahead and start doing whatever the work is. And the idea then is that you convert the issue into a pull request. This is kind of slightly philosophical as to why we do this. The idea is that the issue is kind of a snapshot of this is what the idea is before any work starts. And then it's known that kind of no plan survives contact with the enemy. Like as soon as you start developing something, the shape of it will probably change according to reality. So the idea is that you put it into a pull request, and that pull request just sits open the whole time that you're developing the actual feature. And over time, as the scope of the feature changes, you update the pull request. And once the feature ships and is done, you merge that pull request and it goes into the proposals repository for a long-term record of what you did and why, and all the decisions that went around it. A little bit like an ADR, an architectural decision record, if you're familiar with that terminology. So, and then, yeah, that's merged and then we're done. I should note at this point, we actually have a core team retreat next week. And one of the things we're going to discuss is whether the pull request step is needed for NF Core. So far, with the first few months that we've done this, it seems a little bit kind of overkill for us. So we might get rid of the pull request. So we'll see if that actually survives. But if in doubt, come back and check here. And by the time you get through to this stage, it should be pretty clear as to what you should do. The most important thing is to get as many people to know about the first two steps as possible. Okay, and then the rest of the page kind of goes into this in more detail. I've already said what RFC stands for. I should say the scope for RFC typically means not pipeline specific. Right, these are things that are going to affect the whole community. So it could be in a template, or it could be on the website, or it could be, guidelines or something like that. And the other kind of jargon is champion, and that basically means that there should be someone who owns an RFC. Doesn't necessarily that mean that that one person has to do all the work, but this person is like this shepherd that's going to shepherd this thing through to completion. Like chase it up, make sure that issues, things get merged, things actually get finished. And that means that that person we can go and hassle if the RFC hasn't happened. There's basically a main contact person. And that makes sure that the RFCs don't just get abandoned. Because ideas are easy to come up with, but what we really need is an idea that someone's going to follow through with. Champions can change. There can be more than one champion. So it's absolutely fine to kind of bring in a bunch of people, but every RFC should have a champion. A little bit about scope, which is what I just kind of said about where it shouldn't be pipeline specific. There's a few examples. These were kind of the Kickstarter RFC ideas, which came along when we were first developing this process. So you can read through those, and then it kind of takes you through each step of what it does and how it works and how the voting works and stuff. Okay, so if I hop over to the NF Core proposals repository, I'll quickly kind of show what this looks like. I can go into issues and I can see that there's a bunch of proposals in here. Not all of these are RFCs. Some of them are proposing new pipelines, and you can also propose new special interest groups. But I'm going to focus on RFCs. So I'm going to go to new issue, and you can see there's different templates here. New pipeline, new special interest group, external links to a documentation I just showed. And I'm going to click new RFC proposal. This takes me to this form, which kind of has a structured input. I give it a title. I make sure that I've read the documentation, because that's really important to understand how this is going to work. And probably the most important of the whole thing is this summary. You're going to write down what the thing is that you expect, and kind of basically the elevator pitch of what your idea is and why we should care. There's a space for a champion here. At the moment, this isn't required. We might make it required. The idea was that we didn't want to kind of put people off, but I think there's quite a lot of RFCs now floating without champions. So I think we might make this required, at least to start off with, just to make sure that someone's name is next to it. And then here we kind of go into more detail. So why this idea has come up, why it's needed, what the context is, what the RFC should achieve, like how do we kind of define success here, like what things need to be done for it to be finished, and then non-goals, like which things are we explicitly not trying to do and what's out of scope. And then usually things often come out of Slack discussions or GitHub issues and stuff. So there's some space to kind of refer to prior conversations. Okay, so you only hit submit, and we can look at a couple of examples. There's one here from James that came out of discussion in the maintainers group just recently, URFC, which is to do with moving storage for the NF Core test datasets. This is perfect scope for an RFC because this is affecting every single NF Core pipeline as to where we store data. It's a big change, it's a big significant thing, and there's a lot of discussion about where it could go or different things. So this RFC came out of prior discussion in the maintainers group. Obviously, that could be anywhere. You can see it's missing a champion, so maybe I'll go and ask James to put himself down as a champion for this. And then there's a nice background and motivation as to what the problem is at the moment, why we need to do this, what we want to achieve and what we don't want to achieve, and some references. Now, what you see under this is an automated comment, which will get posted by the NF Core bot as soon as you submit the issue. And what this does is it lists all of the people who are in the NF Core team who are going to do the voting on this RFC. And this issue gets automatically updated every time, any of us post a special comment. So you can see Nicholas has come in on this issue and he's written /approve. And this comment then is automatically being updated to have his username in the approved column. As different people go in and write comments, we can have kind of discussion here about whether to do it, how to do it, and so on. And the status will get updated as we go along. Only core team members can approve and reject for now. Sorry about that. But everyone is welcome in the discussion. Doesn't matter who you are, you can come and drop a comment and be part of this conversation. And the more, the merrier. When we hit kind of a quorum for NF core team, so that's at least 7 people currently, this is automatically calculated by how many people are in the core team, then the status up here will be changed from pending to approved. Or if people reject it, then it can be changed to reject. And you can see all the rules for how we count up over in the docs over here. So this one's still on the play. That's still being discussed. Go and join in if you're interested. An example of one that's finished is the very first RFC, where I wrote an RFC for RFCs. It's very meta. So you can kind of see how I wrote that here, some context and everything. And you can see this is actually before we had the automation. But it all got approved and the issue got closed out. I then wrote a pull request for this RFC where I copied over the contents of the issue and added in a bit of additional kind of metadata at the top. There's the template for this. And then once it was shipped, in this case, it was a case of writing a documentation for the website, which you can see in this pull request. Once that was merged, then this initiative pull request was merged and it was finished. And now you can find this pull request over in proposals and you can see it was merged in here. And so that's kind of a reference for the future and can be backed up and everything. Great. The final bit that I haven't mentioned actually is there's another Slack channel which is called New RFCs, and we welcome everyone to join into that. That's not really a place for discussion. When an RFC is created as an issue, we should all discuss it in GitHub because that's the central place for that. But this channel has automation so that whenever a new issue is created or closed in the proposals repository, there's an automatic Slack message here. It's just an easy way to kind of keep track of new proposals as they come in. So I really recommend anyone who's interested to go and join that Slack channel, just so you get a ping whenever a new one is added, and then you can go and read the GitHub issue and discuss it on GitHub. So in summary, please submit all your ideas. We want to have all your improvements and suggestions and fixes and everything else, all your wild ideas. So come and chat to us in RFC suggestions to see whether you think it would be an RFC or not. Come and propose them in the NF Core proposals repository. Use the template, follow the documentation. Hopefully it'll be accepted and we can ship the new thing. And even if you're just lurking in the community and curious about what may be coming down the road, join the new RFCs Slack channel to see about RFCs as they come in. And maybe at some point in the future, we'll start building an automatic roadmap website or something like that based off proposals. We do have a kind of a simple project board at the moment off that's pipelines off our RFCs. So it's a bit kind of scrappy at the moment, but something like that might be coming down the road. We'll see. And finally, also, you might notice some of this might be familiar for those of you working with pipelines. The automation for RFCs was very, very popular. It seems to work quite well. So we're starting to also port this mechanism over to proposals for pipelines and also proposals for special interest groups because we think it works quite well. So any feedback on that process is also welcome. Right, with that, I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Phil. Are there any questions from the audience? There seem to be no questions. maybe we can put in an RFC for more questions.
Uh, yeah, I might have one question. We recently merged like some RFC. Which one are the ones that we merged?
Or you can go and see if you go to the NF4
RFC
proposals.
and advisories.
Yeah,
So for the month, we just merged the two. So the one with the RFC and the one with the advisories.
exactly, because those are the only ones which have actually been completed. The pull requests for RFCs are expected to have a long shelf life because it's not for pull request itself is not really the point. The point is that that's just representing this entire massive feature, and it should be quite a big feature if it's going to be an RFC. So those are expected to sit there for months and months before getting merged, really.
Yeah, that's what I assume as well, given the RFC I'm like currently championing. So that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, I've also seen that the default champion for an RFC is Maxime, so
Mhm. Just realistic expectations.
Yes.
no. Will the champion be informed if they get named? Because it seems you can put in just anyone.
Um, yeah, I mean, it's just ends up in the GitHub issue as you tagging someone's name. So I guess they'll get a notification just by normal GitHub comment mechanisms. It might be a bit rude to do it without telling somebody, but that can be part of a discussion, maybe.
Are there any more questions? Anyone can unmute themselves now, so. No, but it seems it's very clear. So thank you very much, Phil. And I'll hope to see a lot of RSCs in the future.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.